Good morning. What a week, huh? Have you guys been keeping up with this George Floyd situation? It's getting out of hand now. I know certain cities are really dealing with some bad rioting. And I just kind of been sitting reflecting, and I think there's connection of what we'll see here in Scripture today of what's going on right now, at least in the United States. I mean, the virus, the way we change, just the way we're seated already. But then the riots that are taking place, there's a portion of our population that thinks that the cops are after them. Obviously, there's some bad cops, but also there's a lot of good ones. But not even that, all the innocent bystanders, all the stores that are being broken into. And not even that, it's an election year too. It's almost like dynamite ready to go off. But just reflecting on all this, it's not all necessarily bad in the sense that death is real. The fear of death is real. Sin is very real. And I think we forget that in the United States. But now some of these things are clearly out there. There's people clearly feeling oppressed, some actually oppressed. And it's difficult. My take on the whole matter, and this is true of anywhere, but probably especially the United States, is a spiritual famine. Right? People always like to point to the fact that they've taken God's name out of schools. I'm not so necessarily worried about that, but as the people as a whole, there's a famine. There is a famine of God's word, of who God is and what God requires of us. An understanding of who we are as sinners before God. I don't know. Let's see if I can't draw some connections when we get further into the sermon. I'm going to read an article. This is about famine. Because remember, the setting of this whole Joseph scene is famine. And I ran this article, and I think it'll give us an idea of how terrible they are. It says the East Africa famine has already cost hundreds of thousands of people. This is back in 2011, so it's been about a decade. Has already cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. Numbers range from 12 to 13 million who have been affected by the disaster. But the consequences of such a wide-scale crisis go much deeper than just starvation or even death. While it's easy to believe that things will settle down once the food situation gets back to normal, Pat Melanson with Baptist Global Response says the damage done by this catastrophe will far outlast today's hunger. The side effects are just astronomical, and they don't go away once people have food in their stomachs. Melanson, Managing Director of Disaster Response and Training for BGR, tells Mission Network News, some of the long-term side effects can be devastating. I think to a community for probably a decade or more. The list of side effects is miles long. Entire nations will be rearranged by the end of the crisis. For one thing, notes Melanson, there has been a massive migration of people within the affected nations. People have left their homes to find food, but even those in food-secure areas are moving to areas with no food security when they hear that organizations are handing out meals elsewhere. When people choose to migrate, their land is often seized by others. This, says Melanson, results in a loss of livelihood. People who up until the crisis had been pastoral herders or agriculturists suddenly have no land with which to continue their work. On top of that, there has been a significant loss of livestock in drought-affected areas, robbing pastoralists in particular of their livelihood. These losses encompass entire families who also have to struggle with the loss of family members, and indeed entire generations. Even if you go back to a perfect situation where they're back in their home environment, they still have their land and still have their livelihood, notes Melanson. In many cases, they've lost 2 generations of people. The older generation who were there teach the younger generation how to live off the land, and the younger generation who should be coming up to learn from those in that middle age group and who have actually lived through it. Many children who have survived have lost their opportunity for education, a way to a better life. Melanson reports as high as 80% dropout rates in available education venues since the famine struck. Children in particular are at even higher risk now of inhumane treatment. People begin to resort to things that are going to enable them to survive, Melanson explains. So you'll have an increase in the amount of prostitution. You'll have an increase in the amount of trafficking of children. You'll have an increase in the number of child soldiers. When you have children who are starving, you offer them food. If they're willing to join your ranks, then it increases the number of children that are available. Add to that the economic troubles that nations are sure to face as a result of migrations and responsibility to aid relief. Without Christ, the situation is utterly hopeless. BGR knows the truth that though, in this working tireless to share with those suffering these nations, currently BGR is focusing on addressing the immediate need of hunger, but the ministry has been developing self-sustaining programs in that part of the world for 40 years. In the days, months, and years to come, BGR will work to create more of the programs while spreading the message of Christ, the only one who can truly redeem such a tragic situation. And that's only a sliver of what happens in a family. So many consequences. Everything's affected. Think about the virus that we're going through. That's nothing compared to a famine. And look how much it's already affected all of our lives. Now think of 13 million people, all of Arizona, hungry. How many people have moved to New Mexico, California, Utah? No states are affected by it. Imagine. The elderly will pass away. Many of the young will pass away. Only those in the middle age will maybe have the strength to get through it. You lose generations. It's just utterly astounding. And that's why the person says there is no hope other than Christ in such a situation. I don't bring that up to scare us, but we have no point of reference in the United States for famine. Maybe the Great Depression. I know my great-grandparents lived through that, but that's about it. And so for us, we have to read some of those things and realize how terrible a famine really is. I had a few paintings that I was going to throw up. One of them was, I think it's from the Middle Ages. But you have some people in the background kind of just languishing, laying on the ground. And then you have, in another spot, you have 3 people cutting up a dog. And they had other paintings of cannibalism. It's that awful. Things that we just would disgust those people, is no longer disgusting when you're hungry. So, today, or actually the whole series of Genesis has been, we called it the unfolding of the covenant, or the unfolding of the Abrahamic covenant. Literally, unfolding is what? You have a folded piece of paper and you unfold it. But we're not using that sense. We're using the sense that something's kind of hidden and it needs to be revealed. In this case, God gives the covenant to Abraham. It's clear what God's going to do. We just don't know how he's going to do it. So when God gives the covenant in Genesis 12, and we're going to go through it here in a second, We don't know what that's actually going to look like through the rest of Abraham's life. But the rest of Genesis, not even that, Exodus, all that, is the unfolding of this covenant and these promises that God makes to Abraham. God is like displaying how he's going to make these promises come about. This is Genesis 12, 1 through 3. It says, "Go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land I will show you. Leave everything that you know and follow me." Think about that, Christian. Leave all you know, your family, your land, all of that, to a place that you have no idea where it's at. I'm going to show you, and that's where I'm going to take you. It says, "I will make you into a great nation." Remember this promise here, because we're going to come back to this a number of times. Next thing he says, "I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." I mean, that's clear. We understand that. But the question is now, how is God going to do that? How is God going to bless them? How is God going to make their name great? Now pay close attention to this. It says, "I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt." And again, what does this look like? I will bless those who bless you. What does that mean? Whoever blesses Abraham and by extension Israel will be blessed. We understand that. We just don't know what it looks like. And it says, "All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." In another passage, God says, "All the nations will be blessed in Abraham's seed," or his son or sons. So someone's going to come from one of Abraham's descendants, and all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed in him. And we see that God makes this promise to Abraham's son Isaac, then to Isaac's son Jacob, and that's where we're going to pick up today. If you guys remember, it's been a while, it's been a couple months. When God made the promise to Jacob, the first time that he appeared to him was Jacob was fleeing from his brother, Esau. If you guys remember that story. He stole the blessing from his brother, and his brother wanted to kill him, so he's leaving. And on his way to Paddan Aram, he falls asleep with his head on a stone. Then God appears to him, and this is where we'll pick up. Genesis 28, 13 through 15. So the Lord was standing there beside him, saying, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your offspring the land on which you are lying." There's the promised land. "Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out toward the west, the east, the north, and the south." That's the equivalent of saying, "I'll make you a great nation. And then all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring." So who's the offspring that God is speaking about here? I would say immediately it's Joseph. Right? And we'll see that today. But there is one who is truly a blessing to all the nations. That is the son of Jacob. Who do you think that is? Verse 15. It says, "Look, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go." Now listen carefully. "I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Why is this important? So when God promises something, he will carry it out, right? Not like us, we promise things and then we break our promise. God, when he says he's going to do something, he does it. But not only will God carry out his word, he will be present to carry it out until it is done. So if God says something, he has, for the sake of his own name, to show that he's a God who keeps his word, he is present to make sure that it comes to pass. So he's saying, "Jacob, you are fleeing away, but I'm telling you, you're going to come back to this land, and I'm going to be with you to make sure that that happens." Think of the implications. Now, this is from last week. So Jacob finds out that his son Joseph is in Egypt, and now they're all headed towards Egypt because they have food there. Joseph has a place for them to stay, and then he stops at Beersheba so he could worship God. And God appears to him there. This is Genesis 46, 2-4. It says, God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. So that's the same promise that God gave to Abraham, now given to Jacob. And we're going to see that accomplished today. We're going to see what that actually means in real life. It says, I will go down with you to Egypt. So Jacob, I'm telling you to go down to Egypt. Do not be afraid. I will go down with you. And I will bring you back. Joseph will close your eyes when you die. So remember that Canaan is the land that's promised, and God's telling him to leave. But just like Jacob, when he was fleeing Esau, and God said, you got to leave and you're going to come back. Again, he's saying, go down to Egypt. I will bring you back. In fact, I will be with you to make sure that you do come back. So the immediate context of all of this, we got to follow Joseph in his story. We have to remember he was Jacob's favorite son. But most of all, God appeared to him in a dream, and God revealed to Joseph that he's going to rule over his brothers. And if you remember, Joseph tells his brothers that. He says, I had a dream, and you guys were basically all bowing down to me, even dad and mom. Who says something like that, right? But God gave that dream. God was showing Joseph that this will happen. The problem is his brothers hate him, and they reject him. And then they sell him into slavery in Egypt. And that's where Joseph, for 13 years, he's a slave or he's a prisoner. And we see that he's sold in slavery into Potiphar's house, where Joseph is, he's just gifted. He knows how to manage things. So he rises to the authority in Potiphar's house. And we're all familiar with the story that Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph and he refuses her. And then she lies about it, says that Joseph tried to rape her, and then Joseph is thrown in prison after that. And again, Joseph shows that God has gifted him with management, that he becomes pretty much the head over all the prisoners. And then from there, we saw that God orchestrated everything. He gives Pharaoh dreams. He gives Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. He puts the right people in Joseph's life at the right time. And eventually, Joseph stands before Pharaoh to interpret a dream for him. And Joseph is able to interpret it, and rightly. And Pharaoh and his advisors see that, this guy has God with him. God is clearly with this man. And the dream that was revealed to Pharaoh is, you're going to have 7 years of plenty. But after those 7 years, you're going to have a 7-year famine, where it's going to be so bad that's going to make those 7 years of plenty nothing. It's going to completely erase it and actually even go beyond that. So Joseph interprets this dream to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh's like, this guy, he has God with him, he can see these things. So then Joseph is released from prison, and then Joseph is put over all of Egypt. He rises to authority. He's going to manage this whole situation where over the next 7 years, he's going to gather in all the grain, all the corn, everything that they need for the 7-year famine that's going to follow. And then last week, the famine begins, and Jacob and his family are starving. I don't even think we're hardly a year into the first year of the famine. First of the 7 years. And they need food. And the irony of the whole matter, and we see where that dream that Joseph had did come from God, is the fact that his brothers had to come from the land of Canaan to Egypt and bow down to him to get food. And of course we know the story that eventually Joseph eventually reveals himself to him and tells him that he's alive, and he's crying, and he reconciles with his brothers, and he tells them, bring my father down here. There's still 6 more years of famine, or maybe 5 years at that time. And come down here, Pharaoh's made me master of everything. I have land for you, I have food, come down here and live. And can you pull up the map? So, X marks the spot right there, Goshen. That's the land where they're going to move to. And it's further south, that's where all the Egyptians live. But so they're living in Egypt, but they're kind of separate from the Egyptians. If you guys don't remember, shepherds are an abomination in Egyptian eyes. It's almost like the Egyptians are the New Yorkers, and the Israelites are, I almost said a bad word there, but they're the cowboys. You know what I mean? They look down upon them. So that's where they stay in Goshen. If you look up some of the pictures online, it's good land for livestock. And that's what people still do there today. So Joseph and Jacob have their amazing reunion after 15 years of separation. Jacob gets to see Joseph. He thought he was dead, and now he is the master of all of Egypt. Imagine that. Thinking your son's dead for 15 years, and the next time you see him, he's the master of everything. But the one thing behind all this is, why did they go down to Egypt? Famine. You pull up that picture. Here's a picture of people that are going through famine. And this is not even half bad as some of the other ones that you can find on there. I mean, in the other pictures, they're literally a skeleton. It's awful. This is what's going on. This is why they had to go down to Egypt. And we're only in the second or third year of this famine. There's still 4 or 5 years to go. And already, within those first 2 years, Jacob and his sons were already afraid of dying. Imagine, you're like, there's no food, we're going to die, and yet there's still 5 more years of this. Awful. Remember what God promised Abraham. He says, I will bless those who bless you. Okay, that makes sense. But what does that look like? Who are the those there? Who are those who are blessing Jacob? And we'll see that today. Genesis 47, 1 through 6. So Joseph went and informed Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in the land of Goshen. He took 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh asked his brothers, what is your occupation? They said to Pharaoh, your servants, both we and our fathers, are shepherds. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to stay in the land for a while because there is no grazing land for your servants' sheep, since the famine in the land of Canaan has been severe. So now, please let your servants settle in the land of Goshen. So if you remember from last week, Joseph scripted his brothers exactly what to say to Pharaoh. Kind of what name, rank, and serial number. We are shepherds. We are here to sojourn in your land because everything's barren from where we're from. And please let us stay in Goshen. It's short. It's respectful. And not only that, they regard themselves as Pharaoh's servants. You know, we're under your mercy, Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, now that your father and brothers have come to you, the land of Egypt is open before you. Settle your father and brothers in the best part of the land. They can live in the land of Goshen. If you know of any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. What a blessing. Think about this. Would any of this ever have happened if God did not sell Joseph into slavery? That was necessary. Think about that. Joseph, he's the one man that suffered. He's the one man who overcomes all that. And now Joseph's family is blessed because of it. Settle wherever you please, is what Pharaoh's saying. It made me think about it. Maybe some of you guys have been in a situation, maybe you have a dream house or a dream location where you want to live. Tiffany and I were recently in the house looking for a house in a certain area. And oh my gosh, is it difficult to get there. Here, Pharaoh just grants it. No, there you go. If the land is not enough, Pharaoh gives them jobs. He's like, you guys can watch over my livestock. They got land, they got livestock. Verse 7. Joseph then brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? Pharaoh's obviously impressed by this old man before him. How old are you? Jacob said to Pharaoh, my pilgrimage has lasted 130 years. My years have been few and hard. The literal word there is, my years have been few and evil. Think about that. Jacob is blessed, right? We've watched his whole life and we've seen that God has blessed him. God has kept him. But it wasn't easy. After 130 years, Jacob said, my years have been difficult, hard, evil. Think about it this way. God blessed Jacob as he promised him. He kept his word. But nowhere did God promise an easy road. The fact that God promises to be with Jacob the whole time to carry out his promises toward him, it assumes that it's going to be difficult. The Christian life is not easy. Just think about repentance. First, you have to admit you're wrong. How many people can't even do that first step? Right? No matter how many people talk to them. No matter people say, hey, you're deceived. This is clearly wrong. And they can't admit it. The next thing is you have to confess it. How many people stumble on that part? Yeah, I may be wrong, but I'm not going to confess it to that person. I'm not going to say it to anybody. Even now, I think about the times in my life where I had to confess to people. I sinned. This is what I did. I didn't want to do it. I went kicking and screaming. I don't want to reveal this about myself. Even now, life is difficult. I still struggle. Things are not the way I want them to be. So we look at Jacob here, we know he's blessed, but life has been difficult. That's why it's important that God says, I will be with you. God was there the whole time. Jacob further says, and they have not reached the years of my fathers during their pilgrimages. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and departed from Pharaoh's presence. So twice Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Why? Think of how much Pharaoh has blessed Jacob and his family. Seriously, not in your wildest dreams can you expect this kind of treatment. They're foreigners. And they get really good land. They have jobs. Again, there's a famine going on. Remember that article at the beginning and how everything is affected, and yet Jacob and his family have a place to to live. People are dying. People are struggling. Children are dying. Suffering, pain. People are desperate. Verse 11, then Joseph settled his father and brothers in the land of Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land of Ramses, and Pharaoh had commanded, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's family with food for their dependents. So they have good land, the best part of the land. They receive food from Joseph, and all during a famine. If that is not a blessing, I don't know what is. Remember, I will bless those who bless you. So we see that Pharaoh has blessed Jacob and his family. But the promise of God is, I will bless those who bless him. Now let's see what happens to Pharaoh here. Verse 13. But there was no food in the entire region, for the famine was very severe. The land of Egypt and the land of Canaan were exhausted by the famine. Pull up that picture. When I saw that word, in another translation it says the land languished. I had to put the picture up. I mean, the land probably literally looks like that during that time. I imagine there's drought, and things are just as dry as can be. Verse 14, Joseph collected all the silver to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain they were purchasing, and he brought the silver to Pharaoh's palace. So Joseph still works for Pharaoh. He has to carry out his duties. And Joseph is good at his job. Right? He proved it in Potiphar's house. He proved it in prison. Now he's proven it with Pharaoh. Joseph is good at his job. Pharaoh has all the silver. All of it. Think about that. All of Mesa giving us their money. That's wild. But who cares about money when you are hungry? When the silver from the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan was gone, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die here in front of you? The silver is gone." So you got to remember, Joseph still serves Pharaoh. He can't just give out all this grain that they've been collecting for free. He's still got to carry out his job. But what else is left to buy food? All the silver's gone. All the silver belongs to Pharaoh. Verse 16. But Joseph said, "Give me your livestock. Since the silver is gone, I will give you food in exchange for your livestock." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks of sheep, the herds of cattle, and the donkeys. That year he provided them with food in exchange for all their livestock. All of it. All the silver, all the livestock. When the year was over, they came the next year and said to him, "We cannot hide from our Lord, the silver is gone, and that all our livestock belongs to the Lord." They're like, there's no use in lying, we have nothing left. We don't have any silver, we don't have any livestock, you have everything. What are we to do? There's nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we die here in front of you, both us and our land? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. Then we, with our land, will become Pharaoh's slaves. Give us seed so that we can live and not die, and so that the land won't become desolate. This is the length people will go in famine. They have nothing left. You know, what is the use of our land if you're dead? Right? Look at that. What is the use of your own freedom if you're dead? So they sell the very last thing that they have, their land and their freedom. Think about that. So desperate, they no longer own themselves. They're someone else's property. That's hard for us in modern America. We hold up our freedom to the point of idolatry. We can't even think about selling ourselves. But that's how desperate the situation is. Verse 20. In this way, Joseph acquired all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, because every Egyptian sold his field since the famine was so severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's. And Joseph moved the people to the cities from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not acquire belonged to the priests, for they had an allowance from Pharaoh. They ate from their allowance that Pharaoh gave them, therefore they did not sell their land. So Pharaoh now literally owns everything in Egypt. Think of your guys' selves. Imagine if you owned everything in the valley. All of it. All the property, all the people, all the wealth. Again, if that's not a blessing, I don't know what is. We see that Joseph moves the people into the cities from all over Egypt. I think for two reasons. They'll be easier to feed, to give seed, but also the land is not theirs anymore. Basically, Joseph's saying, get off that land, it's not yours. We have some cities for you guys to live in. But we see that one class of people did not have to sell their land or themselves. The priests. The priests are already have like an allowance of food from Pharaoh. So they don't have to sell their land. They're already fed. That's the only parcel of land that Pharaoh's not able to take. Verse 23, Joseph said to the people, understand that I have acquired you and your land for Pharaoh. Joseph's like, let it be clear. Everything belongs to Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, sow it in the land. At harvest you are to give a fifth of it to Pharaoh, and 4/5 will be yours as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves, your households, and your dependents. Pharaoh blessed Joseph, Jacob and his family, and now God has blessed Pharaoh beyond imagination. It really is. I don't think we have a concept of owning everything like that. If that's not enough, he receives 20% of all their crops. So you own everything. Now whatever they grow, you get 1/5 of it. Now just think if you're in the same situation. You have lost everything. You have given up everything. You have sold everything, even your own freedom. How would you react? How would you feel about that? Again, this speaks to the desperation of the Egyptian at the time. Verse 25, you have saved our lives, they said. We have found favor with our Lord and will be Pharaoh's slaves. They're ecstatic. You have saved us. Think about it. God has placed Joseph at the right place at the right time to save lives. Again, you got to think about what Joseph went through. He suffered 13 years of suffering, and he overcame all of it. Now has led him to a point to be in a place at the right time to save his own family and to save all the Egyptians. The people are thankful. They have lost everything, but they will live. Just a quick note on the 20% tax that Joseph levies upon them. It's generous. In ancient Babylon, there's a few notes that I saw in the commentaries. During Hammurabi's reign, which is maybe about 200 years before this, the tenant farmers had to pay at least half their crops, if not up to 2/3. Can you imagine? Given you keep one part and 2 parts go to whoever is your master. But also later on in Israel's history, about 150 years before Christ, they paid 1/3 to 1/2 of their crops to use the land. So 20% is a pretty good deal. I think that's why they're happy. It's not burdensome. And this is all of Joseph's planning. The best way to compare Joseph is, maybe for different generations, he's like a Warren Buffett or a Jeff Bezos. Or for the younger generation, Elon Musk. He almost has the ability to see things before everybody else, then manage it to get to a point where it creates wealth. For us, it's kind of difficult though. We got to realize that Joseph has taken all the wealth, Joseph has taken all the livestock, and he's taken them all as slaves. So on the one hand, we have to realize he still works for Pharaoh. He's still carrying out his duty. He's a man of duty. However, on the other hand, yeah, Joseph does all these things. It might be difficult for some people to see that. But this is where the 20% tax is important. Joseph is compassionate. Joseph could have taxed them as much as he wanted. He really did. He had that power. But he did not burden them with heavy taxes. So we see that through all this, Joseph saves all their lives. But not only that, I guess the best way to put it, his yoke is easy. If that sounds familiar. Yeah, they sell themselves into slavery, but they can have a more compassionate master, someone who truly cares for their livelihood. We got to realize, of course, none of this would happen without the desperation that comes from famine. That's how desperate this really is. Verse 26, Joseph made it a law, still in effect today in the land of Egypt, that 1/5 of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. Only the priest's land does not belong to Pharaoh. So Moses wrote this a couple hundred years after this happened. And he's saying, this law still exists. Verse 27, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired property in it and became fruitful and very numerous. Now Jacob lived in the land of Egypt, 17 years, and his lifespan was 147 years. So Moses here makes it clear that Israel is settled in Egypt, but again, they have acquired property, they have food, not only that, they are fruitful, they are thriving, and Israel's population multiplies. In other words, God is making them what? A great nation. He's making them a great nation in the midst of famine. Famine that usually crushes nations, families, individuals. In the midst of all that, God is making Israel a great nation. I mean, if we claim to be God's people, think about it. Put that together. In the midst of worst of times, if we truly are people that hear God's word, that we hear his promises, he will be with us in the midst of all of it. To languish like everyone else, to prosper. So, conclusion, what have we seen today? First and foremost, God is keeping his word to Abraham. We must know that. He said, I will bless you. And we see it right here. This is what it looks like. They're turning into a great nation amidst the famine. And God also said, I will make you a great nation. Right? They have land, they have food, they have jobs, they are increasing as a people. They're in a foreign land, and yet they're being turned into a great nation. You know, when Abraham heard that, right? I'm going to turn you into a great nation. He probably never had in mind that my descendants are going to be in Egypt, and they're going to be made into a great nation there in the midst of famine. God also promised, I will bless those who bless you. We know that God was with Joseph for the purpose of saving many lives, especially his own family. But Pharaoh showed great trust. He showed great wisdom in recognizing in Joseph a man, a wise man who has God with him. And he shows this trust and grace to Joseph to make him leader of all Egypt. And Pharaoh's generosity, his grace and his faith in Joseph is extraordinarily repaid by God. I will bless those who bless you. Again, I can't say this enough. God is a God who keeps his word. Genesis proves that. Just throughout, from chapter 12 to the end of the book, God says something and then he does it. We don't necessarily know what it's going to look like and what it's going to entail, and often it's very difficult. But God carries it out. And this is one of the chief this may be the chief characteristic that separates God from everything else, from all other false gods. He says something and he does it. He keeps it. This is Deuteronomy 7:9. It says, know therefore that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps his covenant. That is, God says he makes covenant, he makes promises to someone, that he's going to have this sort of relationship with them, and this is what he's going to do in this covenant. He's a God who keeps it. And his loving kindness to 1,000th generation with those who love him and keep his commandments. So again, we serve a God who keeps his word. He says something, he carries it out. He says he's going to bless Israel. He blesses them, even in the midst of famine. He says, I'll bless those who bless you. He blessed Pharaoh beyond all imagination. But we all claim the blessings, right? God said we all like to look at the good things that God says that he'll do. And for good reason. But if he's a God who keeps his word, it's got to make us look up straight, because he's a God who promises judgment too. He is. Not even that, he spoke this to Abraham, what he's about to do to Egypt. This is Genesis 15:13-14. Then the Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, your offspring will be resident aliens for 400 years in a land that does not belong to them, and will be enslaved and oppressed. However, I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will go out with many possessions. So they're living it up right now in Egypt. But there's going to come a point where Egypt's going to put them into slavery, oppress them, and God is going to judge that nation. We eventually know the story, right? The story of Moses. The 10 plagues. That Israel's placed under terrible slavery and oppression. But by the very nation that blessed them. Think about that. God blessed Pharaoh and saved Egypt through Joseph. But in a couple centuries, he will destroy Pharaoh and Egypt. He will judge them. Pharaoh, you'd say, he's at this time the most blessed man on earth. But soon enough, the kings of Egypt will forget the blessings that were bestowed upon them by God. This makes me think about our country, the United States. Is there any country that has been more blessed by God? Is there? You can say the same about Egypt. Of all the surrounding nations right there going through famine, Egypt's going to live through it. Pharaoh's blessed through all of that. And yet in 200 years, they're going to be judged. It's terrible judgment too. God doesn't skip on the judgment. They lose all their firstborn sons, all their livestock, just their entire army, their king. So like I said, we all like to claim the blessings. Right? God says he'll bless us. Oh, I love that. God also says he judges. We have to take that seriously. So how do we attain to God's blessings? I guess that's it, right? We don't want to run into judgment. So how do we attain to those blessings, those sure blessings that God has set before us? Hebrews chapter 11 is often called the Hall of Faith. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with it. We all know Michael Jordan, right? That's a name everyone here knows. He's in the Hall of Fame. What's that? That an organization has recognized him that he's probably the best who's ever played the game. And people want to recognize him for that. They want his name enshrined so that generations to come will know his name. That there was a man that once played basketball and he played it better than anybody else. And the only way his name's going to make it to posterity is, the Hall of Fame. Same with Hebrews 11, they call it the Hall of Faith. That the author writes about the saints of the Bible. Of those in the Old Testament. He writes about Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Rahab, and the prophets, how by their faith they attained to God's blessing. And we're going to pick up at the end of this chapter. This is verse 39. It says, all these were approved through their faith, but they did not receive what was promised. So all these people that the writer's been talking about, all the Old Testament saints, it says they were approved by their faith. They attained to the goal by faith. But it says, but they did not receive what was promised. What does that mean? Could we say God keeps his promises? But I don't think they attained that full promise in all its glory. That full blessedness of God that was yet to come is still future for them. Why? It says, since God had provided something better for us, so that they would not be made perfect without us. The writer is saying, the Old Testament saints, they didn't attain to those promises so they can enjoy them with us. Together. And I think that's still yet future. When we will all completely see these blessings that God has promised. And we'll see that he keeps his word. Now listen, it says, therefore, since we also have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. It says, therefore, since we have such a large cloud of witnesses, he's talking about all the examples that he's given in the Old Testament. He says, a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. If you want to know what it is to walk by faith, to have faith in God, to attain to those promises, you look to the Old Testament. You look to Joseph, right? His story of suffering, but overcoming it, and reaching the glory after that. Not just him, but any number of saints in the Old Testament. But listen to what it says, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. So every hindrance. What's holding you back from reaching God's blessing? Money? Fame? Family? Entertainment? Think about it. How many stumbling blocks do you guys have in your life? They're making you fail to reach this. And he says, and the sin that so easily entangles us. Everyone sins, but sometimes there's a sin that's holding you back from moving forward. What is it? Lust? Pride? Fear? Anger? Jealousy? Hard heart? Hard heads? What is it? Some of us have sins that just reoccur in our lives that hold us back. What is it? Think in your life. And he says, let us run with endurance the race that lies before us. Life is a marathon. I guess the best way to put it. It's not a sprint. For a marathon, you got to train everything. You got to train your mental capabilities. You got to train your body. How much discipline does it go into run a good marathon? So he says, let us run with endurance. There's a matter of practice of building up your spiritual life, your soul, your heart, everything to run that race that is set before you. Again, Joseph spent 13 years in slavery and in prison. It's a long time. You got to endure. You got to ask, am I ready for this race? Have I prepared myself? Verse 2. This is going to help you. Keeping our eyes on Jesus, the source and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So you got to think about those things that are hindering us. What is it? The sin that's entangling us. Not even that. So those are things almost behind us now. Now you're looking forward to Christ. He is the source and perfecter of the faith. How is that? He's our greatest example. So listen, it says, for the joy that lay before him. So Christ is looking for the joy that was before him. He endured the cross. So he was looking through the cross, beyond the cross, and you realize, what? There's joy beyond that. There's glory. He says, despising the shame. It's shameful to die on a cross. Naked. Spit upon. You're talking about God, the creator of everything that we know, love, and enjoy, that we live in, dies on a cross. That didn't stop God. Why? Because he's looking beyond it. Think in your life, the things that you're going through. Are you looking beyond that? Are you looking at the joy and the glory, the blessing beyond it? So again, this is almost a promise of what? This is a promise of suffering. This is a promise of difficulty. But when we look to Christ, we see a way to live through it. So think about it now. Your fight is not in vain. It's not in vain. If you are fighting now to move forward, whatever your circumstances are, God knows. God will reward. This kind of brings me back to the end and speak about the gospel. And let's try to tie everything in. And this idea of famine. I read that article and what it does to nations and to people, to individuals. It's just awful. But in the midst of that, in the midst of the story, in the midst of all sorts of difficulties, God's people are blessed. You must realize that. I'm not saying it won't be difficult. I'm not saying there won't be death. But God's people endure. And one of the reasons is what? God speaks a blessing forward that he promises certain things, and God says, I will be with you to carry that out. And God's people must know that. They must know his word. Because if you know his word and you set yourself to carry it out, God will be present with you to make sure it's carried out. But this brings me back to the idea of famine, but spiritual famine. I wish we all had like some big old glasses that you look at the world as God sees it, as the Bible speaks about it. If we had these glasses on, and I just throw them up right now, or if you go out, maybe the mall or something like that, you would see walking dead people, spiritually famished, for all intents and purposes dead. I mean, we look at the people, right, the pictures and the bones and everything, and they do look like practically zombies. And we feel bad. If you put on the glasses of the Bible, how God sees the world, that is what God sees. That's what sinners are. Spiritually famished. And then, now we put both Joseph and Jesus next to one another in parallel. And God provided Joseph. You think about it, Joseph suffered. Joseph overcame. Joseph was put in a place of authority to save lives. To save people during the famine. To save his own family. To save all the Egyptians through all that famine. And you think about Christ. Christ suffered. Jesus overcame sin and death and God's judgment by dying under God's wrath and resurrecting, defeating these things. So you think, in this spiritual famine, people need true food. Remember what the article said? They need Christ. They're hopeless here. And the only thing that can help them is the gospel and Christ. But again, I bring it back to everything that's happening in our nation right now. And I think this is nothing compared to probably what's going to come. Who knows the next generation what's going to happen to our country. We see that God blessed Pharaoh in Egypt, and within 2 centuries he destroys it. I would say we've been more blessed than Egypt. And our judgment will be all worse. But that speaks to the fact that just everything that's going on now, that the Word of God is just, there's hardly any of it, I guess, to go around our country. That's the very thing that people need to eat. It's the very thing that they need to drink. That's the very thing that will give them life. So think about that. Just think about physical famine and what it does to a person, and realize the spiritual aspect is far worse. It is far worse. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we want to thank you for who you are and what you've done. Lord, we thank you for the story, the history of Joseph. Lord, that we have an example of suffering and overcoming, and the joy and the glory that's beyond them. Lord, I pray that we realize that you bless your people even in the midst of famine, of all sorts of evil, that we can flourish, that we can become a great nation, a great church through all of that. And our brothers realize that we live in a country that is spiritually famished. They need that true food. They need your Son. Lord, they need the forgiveness of sins. They need to know what forgiveness is, that they may be able to forgive. Lord, that we know what it is to have peace with you. Lord, that we are peacemakers ourselves. Lord, I just want to acknowledge you are God, there's no one like you. We love you, we thank you. Praise in your Son's name. Christ Jesus, amen.